So when you hear the term physical climate risk, it refers to perils, a term that means floods and wildfire and heat and drought, these weather events that can actually impact a building or a business or an individual. And so when we're talking about physical climate risk and how it impacts an investor or why it matters to an investor, it can relate to direct damages that cause downtime for a business. So think of your manufacturing facility and it gets flooded, and now you have direct costs because you have to fix it, but also downtime, business interruption that happens from it. It can happen from supply chain impacts. So weather events, physical climate events impacting a supplier of a company. Think of an aluminum supplier to a car manufacturing flooding, and then that indirect impact of that car manufacturer, they weren't directly impacted, but that weather event impacted their supply chain, and now they have business interruption. Or it can move into items on a balance sheet. This is very important for investors because you can think of rising insurance costs, a cost that you have to continuously pay over time that's continuing to get higher, or adaptation costs, you're hardening assets. So that CapEx outlay that you have to put against the buildings, that is a continuous cost over time, giving a changing environment. So these physical risks are changing. And so when we're thinking about physical climate change, it is what is the risk today, but also how is it changing in the future? And then how does that change the value of the asset, the company, or the investment overall that you're thinking in today's terms? So the way that investors should be thinking about this is it's one thing to say, physical climate risks, floods, fire, heat, drought, as I was just talking about, are going to impact you. But how do you actually take action on this? How do you actually quantify this risk? That's where at First Street, what we do, our whole reason for being, is to take these physical climate risk models and then turn them into actionable insights, turn them into probabilities. How likely is that event to happen? What would the outcome of that event be? What is the damage in actual dollars and cents that could happen? What is the downtime that would happen to then have that building get back to an operational capacity? These are the things that you need to think about when you're looking at an investment, regardless of the type of investment it is, whether it's an equity, whether it's a real asset, whether it's an alternative investment. All of these things are impacted by physical climate risks. And how you actually underwrite them is by turning them into probabilities, actual dollars and cents of those outcomes, and then incorporating that into your investment thesis. And so that's really the way that we should be thinking about physical climate risk today over that hold period of any investment that you're looking at. So when you're looking at the potential data to integrate into your investment thesis, the number one thing that you have to be thinking about is where are you in the investment process? Are you just thinking about a geo strategy? So where should I be investing in the world? There are different regions that will be impacted in different ways. So when we're looking at a more broad view like that, you're not looking at asset specific data, but that asset specific data can be rolled up into a regional view to help give you an understanding of how that company or how that investment thesis may perform in different areas of the country. So that is less granular data and more geo data around population migration, insurance costs, impacts to GDP, things of that nature. When you move into asset due diligence, then you're thinking about, well, how will this actual company, how will this actual piece of real estate, how will this actual infrastructure investment perform given the risks that it actually faces and also where it sits in the world? So the direct assets themselves and then the indirect impacts on those. And so when you're looking at climate data, and there's so many different versions of this, it's because each type of data, especially at First Street, what we do is try to make it applicable to each stage of the investment process, all the way down to when you're managing that asset, you're managing that investment. What are you thinking about over time? How are you thinking about it during your hold period, or what your investment should be into capital expenditures for improvements, or what is the underwriting that you want to do at the beginning around the insurance costs that may go up over time? So these are all the different ways to think about it through the investment process. And there's different types of data that you want to use in each stage of those. So when we're thinking about portfolio construction and leveraging physical climate risk within that, the first thing we have to be thinking about is what type of investment is it? And then how does it have a knock-on effect on the next investment? And what I mean by that is, do you have things like concentration risk? Are there two companies that you're investing in that use the same port? If they're using the same port and that port gets impacted by a physical climate event, so a hurricane comes through, or there's a wildfire that comes and impacts the facility, whatever it might be, you then have loss from both investments, even though they're completely different and in different parts of the country or the world. And so that idea of concentration risk is what you want to be diversifying away from. And so what we're talking about there is portfolio construction that is looking at physical climate risks that are correlated. So there's a concept called catastrophe modeling, which some people may be familiar with, which means we look at the events that could take place across the earth, and then we look at all the assets that might be in a portfolio. And then we say, in a worst case scenario, what are the potential outcomes that would impact all of these assets together? And what does that scenario look like? So that catastrophe modeling and that correlation across investments is really what you want to be thinking about when you're constructing your portfolio so that you can have as resilient of a portfolio as possible. So I'll give you a tangible example here. Perhaps sticking with this aluminum and auto example that I was talking about earlier, you want exposure to the auto sector, but you're agnostic to who it is for your portfolio construction. What you can do is look at not only all of the automakers to see which one is the most resilient from using those catastrophe models I was talking about and saying which one against all potential outcomes would be the least likely to be impacted, the least amount of business interruption and cash loss. But then also then take that against your portfolio overall and run that catastrophe model to say, well, maybe the one that is most resilient isn't actually the one that has the least amount of concentration risk within my portfolio, and might be counterintuitive to think, but a different selection on the auto side might make your portfolio less likely to be impacted because of the correlation of the more resilient one with your other investments. So it's a relatively complex topic, but an easy thing to do when you use things like the First Street Enterprise Suite, upload your portfolio and run these catastrophe models against it to understand how to have the optimized portfolio for from a resilience perspective.